Good, ladies and gentlemen, we will continue with the next panel. My name is Mirjam Bollen. I'm from the Netherlands Defense Academy, in the Netherlands, obviously, and from the Faculty of Military Sciences. And it's a great honor for me to present the speakers. To my left, the last speaker, Dr. Frank Petrikovsky. Then the first speaker, Mr. Andrius Zalitis, and the last speaker, the middle one, Dr. Øystein Lund, and they will recap what happened in the various groups. We will try to keep it below 10 minutes for each speaker, because then I will try to allow for some questions or some additions, or perhaps you very much agree with the former speaker and you may say so also. After one and a half hour, 30 minutes, I'm supposed to ask you to turn back to your group and do the second assignment, so to keep us busy. Right, then for the first speaker, please.
Hello, everybody. I'll try to shortly summarize the results of our group. I would like to thank everybody that actively participated in the discussions once again, and I'll try to make it short, even less than 10 minutes. Maybe I'll do it in 5. So we asked the groups 2 questions. The first question was pretty simple, is what major issues or barriers are we facing now in a better accreditation of joint study programs? What are the issues that are in our way and that are largest, the most serious? The second question was in a way an imagination game, where we imagined that the first issues were already tackled, they were gone, they were solved, and then we would think in a close future, which is more better in this sense, of how the reality looks and what are we solving in the close future. So about problems that we are facing now. The first one, and it was unanimous, is national legislation. I think the best example of this was the presentation made by Inga yesterday in the morning about factual everyday life of a joint study program, where you sometimes have to quadruple your efforts and time resources, money resources, to participating in 4 different accreditation processes and so on. There were a few mentions of different national criteria, both for single study programs that are carried out by a single higher education institutions, and some specifications that are applicable only to joint study programs. So this is the major issue in the group's belief. Then fees. Fees in many senses. First of all, fees in carrying out all of those accreditations that we have to face. Yesterday in the same presentation we saw a couple of examples where the prices vary and you end up paying for at least a couple of the accreditation processes. There are some hidden fees that are not really visible at first sight. For example, translation costs, because there are countries that require you to present documents for assessment in their national language, and a lot of translation does cost money, or a very willing volunteer, which is hard to find. Also, fees are relevant to the institutions that carry out the study program. Usually they end up being more expensive because it includes travel, it includes other models of management and more communication, more cooperation, and so on. And it is simply more difficult to handle these programs financially for higher education institutions that are their owners. And then there are the students that face certain issues of money themselves. Joint study programs, if they are really joint study programs, usually mean mobility, and mobility means traveling costs, finding a place to stay, maybe moving away from your family, and so on. So this is another issue of fees. Now, ownership and management, I will cover it a little bit in more detail on the next part, but basically we still face a challenge where when a program belongs to 4 higher education institutions, it belongs to none in a way. It's not like 100% true, but it happens sometimes. And it has its unique challenges of communication and cooperation. For example, completely different styles of quality management in different institutions, different approach on student participation, feedback loops, and everything that you can think of when you talk about quality assurance. And then the fourth one, we called it the vicious cycle, which simply means that joint study programs are at the moment not a political priority and sometimes not even a priority for higher education institutions themselves. Because if, for example, they have 100 of study programs, only 1 or 2 or maybe a few more are joint study programs. So it means that not many parties are willing to invest, time and other resources into lobbying, into making political pressure so the European approach happens. And there isn't enough, willingness just because we don't have that many study programs, and we don't have that many study programs because it's kind of complicated to establish them, and there are many drawbacks and issues you have to handle. So this is why we see it as a vicious cycle, 2 different elements that affect each other. Now moving on to the perfect world, which isn't perfect. So first of all, political trends. The governments in our countries change every 4 or 5 years, and the European approach to joint study program accreditation is a pro-European, it's a pro-integration idea in principle. And we've seen what's happening in Europe, we've seen what's happening abroad. It's a rise of populism, sometimes with a mix of nationalism. And even if we deal with this, even if we solve the issues that we have at hand, we need to be on constant guard, because with the change of the political government, completely different approach to European integration may come into play, and they would say, let's move back. This is not something that we want to do. This is not something that we want to trust. Then another aspect that would change all the time and that would put these procedures at risk is pressure on higher education institutions and quality assurance agencies. When the governments change, not only their outlook towards the international policies may change, but also their outlook on management of higher education itself and their wishes of what higher education as a sector should, provide to the community, to the country. And sometimes it's more strict, sometimes it's more liberal, and these changes may sometimes force quality assurance agencies, for example, to focus on the labor market, to be more strict, to be more mean to the institutions. They might be used for some reasons, for example, putting pressure on certain higher education institutions. I would dare to say that there are signals of this, that this might happen in Lithuania as well. Then overall quality management. We believe that this would be an endless process of improving how we deal with quality. I could say from a student perspective, because I'm a student representative, is that inconsistency is very annoying and it is very challenging. And when you have in the same study program, even on your national scale, even in your own higher education institution, completely different ways of how lecturers understand what's assessment and how it's connected to learning outcomes and what teaching and learning methods are they aligning with the learning outcomes, it is much more so when you move across institutions, because they simply have a different culture, a different approach. And for a student to be in such a study program is an additional challenge, because you need to face a different system every time you move. So in a perfect world, a student would not need to adapt, because the joint study program would be in its own way, in its own terms that were decided by all of the participating institutions. And then in a way, moving on with joint study programs is some trust in advance. We presume that our partners are going to be strong. We presume that the quality assurance agencies are going to do their job well. And when this happens, we actually go into the real world and we start carrying out, let's imagine, thousands of joint study programs in Europe. And what's going to happen? Somebody is going to mess something up. A professor that's not prepared enough, some management issues, some administration issues, and then we'll have a real life quality on actual trust. Because when something goes wrong, people start to blame others or maybe themselves, and they will look for other parties, at fault. Maybe another institution isn't dealing with quality assurance as they were supposed to do. Maybe we do not trust that quality assurance agency anymore because, look, they've accredited this program and this is what's happening now with the program, and so on. So basically, our trust in each other is going to be constantly tested by sometimes minor, sometimes more major issues, because they will become scandalous at some point, and then you know, we'll stay together or say goodbye to each other. So now I'm saying goodbye to you.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Is there anybody who has some comment, except for the applause, well deserved, but has some question or comment to Anders at this time? No? Then we proceed.
Thank you very much. Now it's on. We come up with 5 points, and the things under there is just for me to help to remember what to say about it. And we have also mixed a little bit what's the problem right now and what will become even more the problem in the future. And I think the groups in our room were quite much into thinking that we have so many problems to solve and they will probably not be solved. So we have to live with existing problems also when we are facing the future. The first one, and this is not very surprising, is about legislation issues, but also national procedures. And at that stage, some of the groups did not only ask what are the problems, but why are the problems? And also then trying to go into questions like, are there room for flexibility in the national agencies? Do the national agencies have a culture of flexibility? Do they strive for flexibility? Is it really possible to find room within the system, or do we have to change the system? We also had one group talking quite much about the difference between trust and control. Not only that control, if you trust someone, it's lack of control, but it's in different ways something that you have to address. We also went into the problems that different stakeholders, that means both the institutions or those making the programs at the institution, in the national agencies, in the ministries, there seems to be not enough knowledge to answer the questions right the first time they are asked, and also helping the program to develop. We see more and more that questions being asked is not really answered in the right way in the first phase, and that has to do partly with knowledge. And knowledge on different procedures. We also went into the question about, and time here means also money, means time spent. There is a real obstacle, because just making a program means you need to have a lot of time. And then having it accredited means a lot of time. And then being frustrated means a lot of time. So time consuming is really an obstacle. And if someone starts out not by just telling how should we do this, but how should we minimize the time spent on these kind of things, that will be something that really could need some solution. And of course also, I think the ministries should know that this way of making programs is very expensive. And when they know that there is money involved, it might be that they would like to come up with a solution. Then we also had from different groups a point of the different entities with roles in the system. It's not just that it's complicated, but I think Aurelia earlier today used the word power struggle, and that is an obstacle that we see. And it's not, we have said something about lack of knowledge, but also lack of rationality. Because it's not so easy to understand why this is going on, and why the different entities with roles in the system would like to keep their little part. If you take the picture of sovereignty, that is maybe part of it, giving away something. We heard yesterday about when it comes to recognition of foreign education, then it's easier for us to have trust that the others are good enough. But when it comes to having a program together that we have so much control over and the institution have control, then we have problems giving away what we would call the sovereignty. So we need to keep our little part. And that is something that is problematic and should be addressed. How do we get around or through that problem? Some of the points from the groups also was around definition. And definition, it's partly about what are a joint degree, what are joint programs with double degree, or just being partners in making a program together without too much strict. I know that there are definitions. We see that those definitions are not used in all countries in the same way. So part of problems coming up is not that only the authorities are problematic, but the partners are talking about a program with different definitions. And when this comes out in the end, it turns out to be quite problematic. And also when it comes to definition, the question about accreditation as such is not used in the same way in all agencies. And that is partly the difference between those working on institutional accreditation and those working on single program accreditation. Much of the language used also here comes from countries that are used to single program accreditation. And I could only say from my own background in Norway, where institutional accreditation is the only thing, and not the only thing, but mostly, then for an institution that is not used to going through a bureaucracy of this kind, it will be nearly impossible to get them to join a joint degree. So it's also from that side difference in what do we talk about when we talk about accreditation and how problematic should it be. And that's also about re-accreditation. One thing was talked about in different groups is just using the words picking the lowest price. Who do we use for accreditation and accreditation procedures? It's partly about picking the easiest agency, but it's also something that some partners feel. When you know that you're dealing with especially one country maybe, that is quite problematic. They have a not problematic, but complicated system. They would like to keep really having it their way. And then the partners are forced to use that country in order to get it the right way. And that really makes the other partners quite annoyed. And that's also an obstacle in this sense when it comes to picking which agency should you use. One of the things being mentioned about upcoming problems is that we tend to think that we can solve this within the European borders and the European system, but joint programs will also be more and more a non-European entity. That was the vote from the red team.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Good. Thank you. Then our last speaker. Please come up, Frank.
Hello. Frank Pietrikowski is my name, from the Federal Ministry of Education and Research in Germany. Everything has been said, I think, not by everyone. So I'm the last one to say something about this group session. And I have this philosophy: if you have a point, you do not use a PowerPoint. So I just speak without notes, except for the notes I wrote down. And my group had a very lively discussion, I must say. I was very happy with the group. The Green group was probably the best of our groups. And there was a big train of thoughts, and I will pack into that train of thoughts different issues. That was quality control versus quality assurance and quality enhancement. And there is this discussion about like ISO norms for education, which do not really fit the educational realm when it's about creativity, I think. But there is, in certain countries, in a lot of countries, with very good intentions, the drive to try to safeguard the students, especially, from low quality education. And that's why they invent or put into legal practice specificities, like Aurelia put it this morning, that take care of all the special things in a national context and that do not really match with other national context. And so they presumably safeguard the quality of the system, but to my mind or to our mind, that is probably not the best way to do it. But it comes from a culture or from a perspective of national policymakers. My system is the best. The same is true actually for professors. My courses are the best. We know that. And that leads again to a lack of trust in an entire foreign higher education system, and leading also to distrust in foreign quality assurance agencies, even if they are registered on ECA. And this also plays together with a lack of incentives for policymakers, and it plays a little bit into what Achim yesterday said, that ministers sign something which they do not understand, and policymakers on national level then think like, okay, he signed it, but we do not have to do anything about it. So, since there are not really incentives to change, for instance, national legislation, since there's also maybe a lack of a critical mass when it comes to joint programs, when you look at how many programs are there in Europe, I just checked yesterday for Germany, it's 252 joint programs, and I do not actually know if we have a specific legislation for that, but it's fine. The higher education institutions will do it. So this was a train of thoughts which was like the main discussion points we had. And then there were two issues that were also already mentioned yesterday. There is the issue of language and translation. That's still an issue. And I do not think I have to elaborate on that. And then another very practical issue is the lack of experts and staff in quality assurance agencies that have the expertise to assess joint programs properly. And I hope the Green Group is now happy with the summary. I look at the people. Thank you. That was it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? First to Frank Petrikovsky or the other speakers? No? Nobody wants to add? Then we're finished, we're out of time, and we're supposed to return to the best groups, all three of them. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Yes, I just said